On December 11, 1971, two divers got themselves into a life-threatening situation while attempting to set a deep diving record to a depth of 480 feet in the blue holes of Andros Island. Watch till the end to discover the horror story of their dive. Andros Island is one of the islands in the Bahamas. There are more blue holes on Andros than anywhere else on Earth. The uniqueness of these sinkholes in Andros makes them popular and often visited by many divers. Blue holes are generally circular and have steeply sloping walls. They can be found both inland and offshore. Blue holes were formed when ocean levels were 300 to 400 feet lower than current levels during the last ice age. Rainwater combined and eventually turned to seawater. This eroded the foundation of the island, which was made of limestone, creating caverns of different sizes and shapes. Divers are always excited about Andros Island blue holes because of their rarity and ecological and scientific significance. They are always fascinating. Several divers have dared to dive to extreme depths in these blue holes. Diving at extreme depths is called deep diving, and it can be very dangerous, as we will cover next. Deep diving is diving to a depth beyond the benchmark accepted by the diving community. For recreational divers, diving beyond 98 feet is often regarded as a deep dive. But in technical diving, a deep dive is a dive beyond 200 feet. At this depth, the use of oxygen alone becomes unsafe due to a high risk of oxygen toxicity. When diving beyond 200 feet, the partial pressure of oxygen rises to such a level that it becomes toxic to the central nervous system, also known as oxygen toxicity or oxygen poisoning. It can cause varied symptoms such as breathing difficulties, dizziness, and seizures. Besides oxygen toxicity, divers who go beyond 98 feet can suffer the effects of nitrogen narcosis. However, divers who've gotten used to diving beyond this depth may no longer feel narcosis at such depths until they go much farther. Nitrogen narcosis, which is also called rapture of the deep, is a change in consciousness caused by breathing compressed inert gas at depth. Divers often feel uncomfortable and confused, affecting their ability to judge certain situations and make decisions. This oftentimes causes them to make the wrong decisions, which could lead to endangering their life. For deep dives or dives beyond 200 feet, it's advisable to make use of gas mixtures like Trimix. Trimix is a combination of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium used during a deep dive with technical diving equipment and techniques. In 1971, a group of well-experienced divers made their way to the Andros Island Blue Hole, Bahamas. The divers were Archie Forfar, 38 years old, Ann Gunderson, 23 years old, Jim Lockwood, 21 years old, and Shek Exley, 22 years old. Shek was there as a support diver for the rest of the divers who dived into the depths. Jim, for the sake of training at the Andros, set up a regimen of progressively deeper dives close to the drop-off walls of the Andros. Jim was the most experienced in deep diving amongst the four divers. He held the record for dives below 400 feet, having made more than 150 dives in his career. Jim went to the Bahamas to visit Tom Mount, a fellow diver, because he wanted to explore the virgin blue holes in the Bahamas. Jim was introduced to Archie and Ann, who had previously been diving between the depths of 380 and 400 feet. Jim, Archie, and Ann had discussions and all agreed to attempt to break the Watson-Gruner record for the deepest dive. In October 1968, Neil Watson and John Gruner had dived to a depth of 437 feet on air in the Bahamas. Jim, Archie, and Ann planned to dive to 480 feet. With this determination, they started workup dives. They first made 40 dives below 400 feet. Next, they made another 25 dives, approaching the 450-foot mark. Their practice dives went smoothly. There were no difficulties encountered. This was significant evidence that they had mastered the art of diving beyond 400 feet. As mentioned earlier, their plan was to dive to a depth of 480 feet and become the new champions of deep diving. The official record attempts were supposed to be set for December 11, 1971. The divers, Archie, Ann, and Jim, were ready for the record-breaking dive. Shek and some other divers were there as support divers to keep an eye on them. Archie planned to use a weighted cable, what Neil and John also used for their descent while setting the deep diving record 3 years earlier. Together with the weighted cable, he also planned to use a traveler clip system, which is sliding down with the divers for maximum depth recordings. All these were done to ensure their survival, because when under a narcosis attack, you'll begin to lose consciousness. Most of the divers who had this narcosis experience usually retain their regulators and continue breathing. But what this team of divers planned was to ensure that their buoyancy compensators were inflated fully during the descent and to tie some weights behind their knees. Once they straightened their legs, this weight would automatically drop off their knees if a blackout happened to them. Such a diver would float up to where Shek was located at about 300 feet, and he would be able to recover the diver. They fixed an engine block as a dead weight on the end of the 480-foot cable, but they didn't unspool the cable before the dive commenced. Archie and Ann were to leave the fall-away weight system and use an empty buoyancy compensator for the drop, while Jim stayed with the original system and made his descent with an inflated buoyancy compensator. Jim intended to use the positive buoyancy safety factor together with the weighted bar. Archie and Ann had different perspectives on this, so they didn't use it. Jim immediately realized that he had gotten into trouble as soon as he made his descent. The cable they were using was oily and greasy, and it was all over his hands. Jim had difficulties holding the inflator valve for the pony bottle through which his buoyancy compensator was being inflated. The weight behind his knees made him drop too quickly into the depth. He couldn't get anything into his vest to reduce the excessive negative buoyancy. Jim went down as fast as 200 feet per minute. Jim thought that Archie and Ann were not keeping up with him, and he was trying to wipe off his oily hands on his wetsuit. It was extremely difficult for Jim, as he was consuming more energy than necessary due to the stress as he was passing through into the deep. Shek, their support diver, was hovering at a depth of 300 feet and watching their dives. Archie and Ann have both gone so far into the deep, and somehow they lost control of themselves. Once Shek noticed that Archie and Ann were in trouble in the deep, he immediately descended below 400 feet. He was desperate to rescue these two divers, but all efforts to rescue them proved abortive. Although the other support divers had determined they wouldn't exceed 300 feet, they had no option but to go deeper for the sake of Archie and Ann. Bill Wiggins dove as deep as 360 feet, but due to the effect of narcosis, he couldn't go any further. Randy Hilton, another support diver at 300 feet, also dove deeper, close to 400 feet, but was also affected by narcosis. Shek watched his two friends, Archie and Ann, in great horror from a distance. They were still breathing on the steeply sloping wall. Archie's head was down against the engine block, and he was still kicking gently as though he was going down the cable. Ann was about 10 feet away on one side. Jim became unconscious at about 400 feet, and he began having tunnel vision. Jim was trying his best to survive at the depth. He was sure that he would probably run into the engine block when he got to the bottom of the cable. He had not opened his inflator valve, but when he got close to Archie, who was still doing very well at that point, Archie helped him to inflate his buoyancy compensator. Archie unknowingly expended so much energy doing this that before he knew it, narcosis had taken him over. Ann possibly didn't want to leave Archie alone in the deep, and this later had proven to be a huge mistake. However, Jim, who had become unconscious, managed to get himself to ascend back to Shek, who was at 300 feet. Shek examined Jim and assured him that there was nothing much wrong with him. Archie had somehow saved Jim's life, but couldn't help himself or his girlfriend in the later end. Archie and Ann were lost, and they were unable to recover them. A dive that started fine later turned into a horror story for these divers. 3 embarked on the accomplishment of this feat, but only 1 made it out alive in the end. Truly, diving at these great depths isn't for the faint-hearted. We would like to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching, take a dive on the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back with another exciting diving story.